All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday. So today, as I mentioned yesterday, we'll spend some time. We'll finish up with Japan. I know we just blew right through the Pacific War, but we that's what we're doing. So we'll kind of finish up the Pacific War today. How it ends. We'll talk a little bit about nuclear weapons and their use to end the war, and a little bit about ethical implications, and then I'll leave it to you because, of course, I just assigned you a micro paper on that very question, so I don't want to get too far into answering it in class because, you know, I'm going to let you do it on your own, right? Yes, and then after that, I have a film for us to watch. But without further ado, let's hop into it here. So Michaela's here. Good morning, Michaela. And Ananda's here. Hello, Ananda. And Ayushi's here. Hello, Ayushi. And Kevin's here. Hello, Kevin. Hello, Shania. John is here. Good morning, John. And Hadil is here. Good morning, Hadil. And my software wants me to update right now, which again is a bad idea because I'm in the middle of streaming, so that'd be a bad thing. Yesterday I asked you to read a whole swath of the textbook. And give me some feedback here about how far did you get? Did you read the whole thing, or were you just about at the end, or where were you? What's that? About 47? What's happening on page 147? Just in general. Like, what's it talking about? You don't what? What's it? Oh, okay. What's going on page 147, guys? Nobody wants to talk to me. Are you still mad because I assigned you all that reading? Because it's not my fault, honestly. Actually, it is my fault. Let's see, 147, okay. Oh, the Cairo meetings with Jiang Jieshi. And then they get to us, okay. All right, so let's, tell you what, I'll give you just 7 minutes maybe, 7 minutes, and we'll just maybe start from about page 148, and we'll try and read the rest of it, answer the rest of the questions so we can move on. Is that okay? Okay. The what? The little, oh, the biography? No, skip that. Who's the biography? Hirohito? Yeah, you can skip over that. He's not important. No, I'm just kidding. He's totally important, but you don't have to read it. Okay, so let's just take 7 minutes and read that, and then we'll talk about it, okay? just one more minute and then we'll talk. Okay, let's talk about some of these, okay? So, yesterday I asked you this question, of course, right? I said, what was the primary cause of the Pacific War and how did it begin? And we said that there was, basically it was connected to Japan's attempt to industrialize, right? They wanted to start building machines and factories and sort of entering the industrial age and sort of enriching themselves and raising their quality of life, just like many countries before them. As we mentioned, of course, Japan is a little bit late to the game. Some countries have industrialized in the sort of mid to late 1800s. Japan is kind of getting around to their industrialization around 1920 or so, but still they're going to follow the same path, right? And in order to industrialize, they're going to need resources, and so they set their sights on Manchuria, right, which is kind of northeastern China or southeastern USSR, if you will. And so they set their sights, good morning, they set their sights on this part of the world. They invade, and then they continue to try to increase their sort of sphere of influence in the Pacific, right? And so they start taking over other islands. They start kind of pushing people out of the way. Older colonial powers like the British and the French are kind of pushed out by the Japanese. But then, of course, the Japanese will attack Pearl Harbor, and that will bring the U.S. into the war and eventually will lead to their defeat, right? We talked about the Battle of Midway and why it was significant, and we said that the Japanese wanted this island to serve as kind of a forward outpost to monitor for any American planes or bombers that might be coming their way. The U.S. wanted it as a sort of forward base to start their campaign of island hopping, right? And so you can see here that Midway is kind of way out in the middle. Is this a map of, yeah, this is the map of Allies, right? So the Americans and the Allied forces, I guess, do take Midway in 1943, I think. And up until that point, we said the Japanese were having all kinds of success, right? They were kind of rolling into one nation after another and kicking out the colonial powers and having victory. And so it was kind of, it was a time of celebration for the Japanese in the early part of World War II. And no offense to the Japanese, but really nobody was opposing them that strongly, right? So even though the Americans had declared war, they were kind of just holding a defensive line while they dealt with Hitler in Europe, right? And then once the Nazis were defeated, then the Americans could kind of shift their focus to the Pacific, right? And once they did, they began to experience victories, difficult victories, but victories nonetheless. And so you can see here on the map, the Americans kind of start off from Hawaii, and then they kind of hop their way through these Pacific islands, defeating the Japanese as they go, and finally getting themselves in position to potentially invade the island of Japan itself. And I think the main island of Japan is Honshu. You can see that Japan is made up of a few different islands, but the biggest one is Honshu, and that's what they're talking about in the text. They're going to invade that main island. So the Americans come to possess an atomic weapon, right? An atomic bomb in 1945. And so, I didn't ask you this yesterday, but since the answer's on the screen, I guess we'll just say it. It does usher in an age of atomic warfare, right? So those of us who know anything about the second half of the 20th century will know that it is in many ways defined by the Cold War, right? And a nuclear arms race between the US and the Soviet Union. And so this is kind of the beginning of it, right? With the creation of this kind of very destructive weapon, right? So we kind of usher in the atomic age here, but also it's going to bring about the end of the Pacific War. It's going to create a situation where the US doesn't really need the Soviet Union as an ally in this fight because they have the biggest stick, right? They have a board with a nail in it, if you will, and they can defeat the Japanese on their own now. Although, if you read in the text, you'll notice that the Soviets kind of moving into Manchuria is part of what convinces them to surrender, right? So, I guess we'll just do this. So when did the Pacific War end? So it ends, of course, when the Japanese surrender. And as we read in the text, the Americans will drop the first of these new atomic weapons on Hiroshima. And shockingly, that's not enough to convince the Japanese to surrender, right? And some of the things that you kind of read about there are hard, for me anyway. They're difficult to imagine, right? They're difficult to imagine a weapon that, lands and detonates and vaporizes everything in its path, right? Like things cease to exist as matter in a split second, right? And you're talking about temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun, and that's insanity, right? It's absolute insanity, these weapons. But again, they're invented, and almost as soon as they work, they are falling towards Hiroshima, right? Again, the first weapon doesn't cause a surrender, and so the Japanese drop another one onto Nagasaki, right? And so based on those two things and the Soviets' invasion of Manchuria, the Japanese decide that it's all over, which it pretty much is. And so they issue their surrender and they sign it aboard the USS Missouri on an aircraft carrier outside off of Japan, right? What's the last question there that I asked you? It was, or is that the last question I asked you? Nope, that's the last question I asked you. Okay, what's my next slide? Oh yeah, I just wanted to say a few things about this because the book doesn't talk about it, and I just thought I would do a little value add here for you. So this whole thing, this whole atomic warfare, atomic age, the nuclear arms race between the Soviet Union and the US kind of all gets started in Germany during the Second World War. And so it seems that the Germans are trying to develop such a weapon. And so in 1938, as you can see here, some chemists are working in a lab in Berlin, and they managed to split a uranium atom for the first time. And so, of course, when you split an atom, when you sort of break the forces that hold an atom together, you release a massive amount of energy, right? There's a massive amount of energy holding atoms together. And so when you split them apart, you release all of that energy. And so these scientists here in Berlin figure out how to do it. And of course, the immediate implication is that, that energy can be harnessed for power, right, as a power source, but of course can also be an incredibly destructive weapon. Again, which is interesting if you watch the Captain America movies, because that's what the Red Skull is looking for too, right? He's looking for an energy source, and when he finds the Tesseract thing, right? The Tesseract is an energy source, and he's thinking of it as enough to power cities and things like that, but he also weaponizes it as well, right? So there's a little bit of a, you know, fictional overlap, if you will. Right, so these scientists kind of figure out how to do it, and as it turns out, our good friend Albert Einstein, who you might have heard of, is actually, I think, in contact with these scientists, and so he kind of heard about it very early on. And so after hearing that the Germans had managed to split an atom, he writes a letter to President FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, right? And he says, hey, the Nazis are working on this incredibly destructive weapon. Just so you know, you might want to get on that, right? And so, of course, the letter goes to FDR. He reads it, and then, of course, the Americans create this Manhattan Project, this top secret project to learn how to split atoms for themselves. And so, the Manhattan Project is successful. They figure out how to do it. They figure out how to weaponize it. And the bomb, as they call it, the bomb is created, right? Interestingly, even though this was a top secret project, Einstein himself was not given security clearance to know about it once it was off the ground. He was. They felt he was a risk because he wasn't pro-war. He was kind of a pacifist, and so he didn't like the idea that the U.S. was going to war. He didn't approve of it, and so I guess the Pentagon thought he wasn't, he wasn't on the team enough to give him security clearance, so he didn't get any. Interestingly, though, the Russians had a spy inside the Manhattan Project, so they knew about what was going on as this was happening, at least as far as I remember. Yeah, so here's our good friend Albert Einstein. What do we know Albert Einstein for? What's he famous for? His gigantic brain. What did his brain come up with? Yes, his classic science equation, E equals mc squared. What does that mean? What does it describe? Right. And what does that mean? What does that mean? Any physics people in here? Physics?
I remember we used to use that in 10th grade to calculate some stuff on physics class. The sun was also thrown inside the problems. I think that
Right. So anyone want to take a crack at why this equation is so important? What? E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the square of the speed of light, which is super fast. So
has something to do with nuclear power.
it does. It does. And so this is kind of what I wanted to say, is that his equation isn't kind of the discovery of, nuclear energy, and it doesn't tell you how to do it, but the equation does describe a bit of what's happening, right? And so he's trying to say here that if things have mass, they have a certain amount of energy. So even if they're not moving, right? Because things that are moving have energy, right? So if I throw this across the room, I'm giving it a certain amount of energy, and that energy is going to carry it across the room to the floor, right? So, but Einstein here in the equation is saying that things have energy just if they have mass. So this has a certain amount of energy held in it, right? And so again, all of the atoms that are present in this are being held together by massive amounts of energy, and this thing has a significant amount of energy. It's just, can it be released, right? And so that's what these scientists are working on. How do we release that energy that things have just because they have mass, right? And so, again, he doesn't really have anything to do with the creation of the bomb. His equation kind of describes something that you need to believe in order to make one, but it doesn't really tell you how to do one, or how to make one. And interestingly, as he points out here, he actually regretted writing the letter later on. And so once the atomic bombs started to fall on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and once he realized that the Germans were never really successful with their atomic weapons program, he regretted it. He says here, yeah, if I had known the Germans wouldn't succeed, I wouldn't have written the letter at all, right? Because he was the one who kind of poked President Roosevelt, hey, the Germans are on this. You might want to look into it, right? And so you might say that if he hadn't have written that letter, the Americans never would have developed atomic weapons, maybe. Or maybe they would have, who knows. But either way, he regretted doing it. He regretted writing the letter. Yeah, so these two atomic bombs ended World War II in the Pacific. They bring about a nuclear arms race later on in the 20th century, which we'll deal with shortly. But again, in the paper I assigned you, and I put the assignment in Microsoft Teams under Files and Assignments, so you can look at it. But this is the question I'm asking you: was it an ethical choice to use these weapons? And so, some of the things that you might think of, and I don't want to dig into this too far because I want you to do your own work here, but it might be interesting to think about, if your choices are use the atomic weapons, right? So pretend you're Harry Truman, you're President Truman right now. You're in a war with Japan, and you want to end the war, and you want to win the war. You have this magical wonder weapon that scientists have just placed in your hand, or you have the original plan, right? And the original plan was to invade the island of Honshu with forces just like kind of D-Day in Normandy, invade, try to take the beach, and then try to take the entire island, right? So difficult choice, but things you might want to think about are things that might come into play in terms of making an ethical decision. How many lives are going to be lost, right? And whose lives? And does that matter, right? Does it matter if soldiers' lives are lost, or does it matter if civilian lives, so just regular people, or are lives? Or is it worse if we bomb civilians and not soldiers? Chances of success might factor into your decision as well, right? How successful are you likely to be? Financial cost might play into it as well, right? These weapons were ready to go, and all you need to do is fly them over Japan and drop them. But if it's going to take you a year to invade the island of Japan and conquer it, that's going to cost a lot of money, right? How much time might be invested? Might the American people support you, or might they not? And again, how does it look, right? So have you ever heard people talk about this, optics? Yeah. So it is something you look through. They often talk about it in like politics and things, and it has to do with the way people will perceive something. So what are the optics of, dropping a bomb on a city of civilians? How does that look for the American people or for other nations of the world? How will they perceive that, right? Will they see it as, oh wow, the Americans are really technologically advanced? Will they perceive it as, oh gosh, the Americans are monsters bombing this innocent city? How will it be perceived, right? What are the optics of this choice, right? And so some of the things that you might want to consider, you don't have to consider all of them or even any of them, but I just wanted to put it out there for you. Okay, good? Oh yeah. Maybe the last thing I'll say about nuclear weapons is that, and we'll see this later, but for the second half of the 20th century, nuclear weapons will be very much on everyone's mind. Okay, so the US and the USSR will enter into an arms race. They'll build lots and lots and lots and lots of nuclear weapons, more than enough to destroy the planet 3 times over, which is a terrifying terrifying amount of weapons. And so the kind of the specter of nuclear Armageddon is kind of hanging over people's heads for most of the rest of the 20th century. What's kind of interesting, though, is that now that the Cold War is over, if you look at people talking about what issues they see as most important, you'll see here I've got a little graph that I've pulled from the internet. Hopefully it's accurate and legitimate. But look how far down nuclear weapons are, right? And nuclear weapons are just as destructive today as they were 50, 60, 70 years ago. But most of them are, some of them are in the United States, some of them are in Russia, some of them are in China. Many of them are sitting in kind of antiquated missile launch facilities that some of them I think actually use floppy disks, believe it or not. Do you know what a floppy disk is? No, the square ones, the plastic ones? No, the square ones are actually hard. Well, the inside is flexible, but the outside is hard plastic. But there's a disk that comes before that is actually flexible, and so the disk is just in like a piece of cardboard almost. And some of these like original missile launch facilities still use this ancient technology, and they haven't been upgraded. And so there's a lot of nuclear technology still out there, more than enough to be incredibly destructive, but nobody's talking about it. Nobody's thinking about it, right? And so they're still there. It's just that we're not really paying attention. But maybe we'll come back to that issue when we start to get into the Cold War and the nuclear arms race and things like that. Okay. Oh yeah, so here, we still have, this is how many, as of 2019, this is how many nuclear weapons exist around the world. As you'll see when we get to the Cold War, those 6,000 or so each for Russia and the U.S. is actually like way less than they used to have. So they've disarmed to a significant degree. Although 6,000 nuclear warheads is still enough to do huge amount of damage, right? 2 of them basically destroyed 2 Japanese cities, and those were the atomic weapons that they built in 1945. Never mind the ones they built in 1985. I'm not sure. Yeah, the upgrade happens too, right? So here is kind of when the atomic bombs are dropped on Japan, that's kind of official confirmation to the Soviet Union that Americans have perfected that technology, right? But of course the Soviets already knew that the Manhattan Project existed, and they were working on their own stuff at the time. But it's going to take them until I think 1949 to create their own nuclear weapons. So for about 4 years after World War II, the US has the monopoly on atomic weapons, but it only takes 4 years for the Russians to develop their own, right? And of course, then they will enter into this race, right? And they'll build more and more. They'll both kind of upgrade their technology as to match the other one, and yeah, it will get out of control. But yeah, there's still a pretty significant amount of nuclear weapons around the world ready to go. I'm happy to say there's none in Canada. We have none. But we'll get to that later too. Okay, movie time? All right, movie time. So, the movie I'd like us to watch is called V for Vendetta. Seen it? Okay, so originally it's V for Vendetta is originally a graphic novel. Okay, so I think it's created by Alan Moore. If you know who Alan Moore is, Alan's done a bunch of Batman graphic novels and probably tons of other stuff since then. And so the setting for this graphic novel is England. Okay, so is the UK. In the slight future, so I think they're in like 2032 or something, so slightly futuristic, but not far off. And it's a bit of a dystopian version of England. Do you know what dystopian means? Yeah, it's kind of an opposite of utopia, right? So utopia is like a paradise where everything is perfect and lovely and fantastic. A dystopia is something where it's basically the opposite of that, where everything sucks and it's horrible and dark and things have gone really wrong, kind of thing. So lots of movies kind of play on a dystopian future. Anyone seen Blade Runner? Or heard of Blade Runner? Blade Runner is a dystopian future. Let me see what else is dystopian. I'm not sure. I can't come up with anything off the top of my head. Anyway, this is a slightly futuristic version of England, fictional, of course. It's a dystopian future where things have not gone well and it's kind of a bad situation. So here's what we'll do. Sorry, I'm having some computer things. Here's what we'll do. So for online people, you will be able to watch this with us, okay? And so if you're online, you can go to Columbia College website, and you can go to the library, just like that little finger is there. It's not the middle finger, it's an index finger. So it's saying go to the library, and then you'll go to Find Materials. There's that little hand there, clicking Find Materials. And then you'll click Streaming Videos right at the bottom there. Click, click. And then you'll go to you'll see a bunch of databases, and under C, you'll see Criterion on Demand, okay? And so you'll click on Criterion on Demand. At some point in this process, it'll ask you to log in, but just do that. And then it'll give you this screen, and you can search for the film. And so here I've got Mean Girls in there because that's the last film we were watching in another class. But here you'll just type V for Vendetta, and the movie will appear for you, and you can watch it for free, okay? So maybe what we'll do is I will set, I'll set the online audience here free to watch some of it, and then we'll come back. Of course, there are questions to be answered in association with this, because we're not just watching it so that we can eat popcorn, right? There's a reason for this. There's no popcorn here, by the way. So the questions are posted in Microsoft Teams. And this is what I'm asking you to pay attention to in this movie, okay? So first of all, there will be an authoritarian or a totalitarian government. So totalitarian is one that a government has kind of control over all aspects of people's lives, right? So there's a government in here that is authoritarian, and I want you to pay attention to how they attempt to control their people, their citizens. What do they use to control the people? Okay? There's lots of things, there's lots of different methods that they use. 2, evidence. What evidence might we have that the government is strongly nationalistic? So nationalism will play a role in this film as well, and we'll see this government, spoiler alert, we'll see them be nationalistic, okay? Pay attention to how minority groups are treated by this government in the movie, okay? Some kinds of items are going to be censored by this government, and I'll ask you what the items are and why. What does it mean to be censored? Yeah, blocked, forbidden, not allowed. Yeah, all of those things. Ooh, there's a virus in this movie too. As if we needed more viruses. This one's called the St. Mary's virus, and the government is going to use it in a particular way. And so pay attention to how how this virus is used by the government. Huh? I guess we'll find out. This stuff is stuff that we can talk about a little bit toward the end, right? Like after we're done. So 6, 7, and 8 are kind of after the film is over. We'll be able to answer these. So talking about what terrorist means and who is or isn't a terrorist and how do we decide. Talking about comparing the government that we see in this movie to V, who is maybe the hero or maybe not. It's up to you to decide. And then the last question too will make sense once the movie is over. Okay? Cool? Cool? Okay. The other thing I'll warn you is there's lots of violence in this movie. So there's like shooting and stabbing and stuff like that. It's not particularly graphic, but just, you know, it's kind of more, it's more comic booky. That's what? Okay, I know it's a century of death, but just in case, I'm forewarning you. You know. Okay, so what we'll do is the questions are posted in Microsoft Teams. Online people, you know how to find the movie now, and so maybe what we'll do is we'll watch 20 minutes. We'll have a break. We'll watch 25 minutes. We'll have a break. And then we'll come back, okay? So that'll be in 35 minutes or so. So just so we can keep track, I'm going to put about 37 minutes on the clock here just to give you a little bit of extra time. And so online people, go and find the film in the Columbia College Library through Criterion On Demand. Watch 25 minutes, then take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back here and maybe talk a little bit about it. Okay? Is what? What's a vendetta? Do you know what a vendetta is? It's an Italian word originally, but what does it mean? Like a grudge? Yeah, it's kind of like a grudge or a plan for revenge, right? So if you have a vendetta is like, I am going to get even. I am going to settle the score, right? I am going to make this right, often through violence. Okay, that's a good question, actually. All right, here we go. So online people, I'm going to set you free to do that. What's that?
The guy she was going to meet, but she couldn't.
Right, right. Okay, so sorry, I was on mute there, online people, so I apologize for that. So we're just establishing characters. So we've got V, the guy in the mask. We've got Evie, the girl who he saved, is Natalie Portman. We've got the Chancellor, the authoritarian leader of Britain. We've got the two police inspectors who we've met. And then the Gordon, right? The Gordon Dietrich, who Evie goes to see. And so I think he has a television show. I think he's the host of a television show. We'll see that a little bit later. But he's a friend of Evie's as well. Who else?
Those family members.
The,
The husband, wife, and the daughter. They're watching TV.
okay, so we've seen some people, some kind of regular citizens watching TV. Yeah. So that family, I don't think will be characters, but we've seen them. And yeah, there's people, regular citizens in Britain watching, in England watching TV, right? Yep, the guy who defuses the bomb. Is that another police guy? I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure who he was exactly, or if he even comes back. But he was there. Who else?
The girl, it looks like Evie's friend.
Evie's friend. Yes. Oh yeah, she's talking to that other woman in the at her work. I'm not sure if she winds up showing up again either. I'm not sure. Maybe. Who else? Who's the guy on TV? We saw him at the very beginning with his opinion show. He was talking about all the immigrants and Muslims and homosexuals and do you remember that? Yeah, so he's got kind of he's on this British television network, the BTN, right? And so he's got a show, and it's kind of an opinion thing, and he tells you what he thinks, right? And so his name is Lewis Prothero, and so Prothero tells you how it is, I guess. What do we know about the British television network? Yeah, it's controlled by the government. How do we know? What do they say?
They lied. They say that he died, but he did.
Yeah, so the news report says that there was a terrorist attack, but the terrorist was killed, but we know he's not. They also said that those explosions and fireworks at the beginning of the movie were, it was all planned by demolition workers. But is that true? No, what happened? Yeah, V blew up Old Bailey, which I think is the law court building in London. They call it Old Bailey. So he blew up the law courts building, and then BTN covered it up and called it a planned demolition. And now this terrorist attack has happened, which arguably it is, but they claim that they've killed the terrorist, and in fact that's not true either. So yeah, the British television network it's a propaganda tool of the government, right? And so I think they say that. They say, hey, we just report the facts. The government makes up the news, or whatever they said, right? So the government tells the BTN what to say, and they say it, whether it's true or not. Anything else? What did V talk about in his little video message? What was he saying? November the 5th is an important date? Next week. Okay. And what else did he say in his little message? Right. So if you want to stand with me, if you support what I'm saying, then meet me in front of the Parliament buildings on November 5th next year. Right. What else is he saying? Yeah, he said something's wrong in this country, right? And we can't seem to speak or move freely or have any freedom, and we've, given up our freedom to this chancellor because we were afraid, right? And he says, I understand that. I understand you were afraid, but we need to take our freedom back, right? Anything else? Anything else? Okay, that's good. So we've got a good grasp of what's going on so far. Can we attempt to answer the first question maybe? Just things that we've seen so far. The first question is, sorry, I'll put it on the screen here. Is that going to work? Hang on. Where's view? There we go. Yeah, so how does this authoritarian government, how does the Chancellor's government control the citizens of England? How are they controlled? And I think that we've seen a few ways already. There's a curfew in effect. What's a curfew? Yeah, you're not allowed to go out after a certain time, right? You have to stay in your homes. And so clearly they have a system of curfews because there's a yellow curfew or yellow curfew, whatever that is. So they actually have different curfews, and they're coded, and they change all the time, right? So clearly the government strongly controls when people leave their house, right? How else are these people controlled? What's that?
They manipulate the news.
Yeah, they use propaganda, right? They manipulate the news to tell people what the government wants them to hear. What else? Yes.
And Sally, when she was in the alley, this guy, what did they show her that she's like, oh, I didn't know this.
Yeah, when she's in the alleyway with those guys, and she goes to mace them, and they show that little thing. What is that, do you think? Yeah, it's a badge, right? And so what does it represent, or who do they belong to? Yeah, they're a government authority, right? And so who do you think they kind of are? What do you think their function is?
To make sure that everyone makes sense.
Yeah, they're kind of an internal police force, right, or a secret police, and so they're kind of like Hitler's SS or SA, right? They're police officers that are kind of undercover, but they keep the citizens in line, right? And so she's out past her curfew, and she, of course, thinks that they are just regular guys threatening to sexually assault her, which they are, but it also turns out that they are government police, right? They're state police. And then she realizes she's in a lot of trouble until V steps in, right? What else do we see? We've got curfews, we've got propaganda through the news, we've got kind of a secret police running around. Yeah, there's surveillance everywhere, right? So there's surveillance cameras everywhere. They mention retinal ID, right? So they're able to scan people's retinas and identify them from the camera footage. Creepy. What else do they say about after the bombing, after the bombing of Old Bailey? They say, oh, you know, we've been monitoring people's conversations, and, you know, nobody seems to be talking about it, or something like that, right? So everybody's phone line is tapped as well. So they're monitoring people's communications. They're monitoring them in public where they go, because they've got cameras everywhere. They can ID everyone. Yeah, probably that's more of like a cabinet meeting, I think. So the Chancellor's meeting with his heads of state, right? Heads of state departments. Yeah, so we see a sort of a cabinet meeting going on. What else do we see? Oh, there's one thing. When the police inspectors are driving to go, they're trying to find Evie, and the police inspector says something like, yeah, I just want a chance to talk to her before she winds up in one of Creedy's black bags. What does that mean? Yeah, so the police inspector is worried that Evie's gonna disappear, right? That the state police are gonna make her go away, poof, she'll be gone because she's seen something or done something that is against the government, right? And so he's like, I just want a chance to talk to her and get her story before she vanishes, right? So there's probably what you would call extrajudicial killings here, right? Where people just, they don't go to trial, they don't go before a judge, they don't get charged with anything, they just poof, vanish, right? The government just makes them go away somehow. Oh, the very beginning. Yeah, what happened there? It was old-timey. It was in olden times. What was going on there?
The gunpowder treaty?
Have you ever heard of it? No? Any?
Italy, though?
No.
The soldiers looked Spanish.
No, it wasn't. I'm not sure how they looked, but it was in the UK. It wasn't, and so a guy named Guy Fawkes tried to blow up, and some other conspirators tried to blow up the Parliament buildings, and so they smuggled in all kinds of big barrels of gunpowder into the basement of the Parliament buildings in London, and Guy Fawkes was down there, and he was supposed to light the fuse at a particular time, but the police found out about it. They came down, they arrested Guy Fawkes, and then hung him for treason. And so that's the mask that V is wearing, interestingly. But that's what that was. So a flashback to the original gunpowder plot of 16 or 17, I don't even know the year. November 5th, they attempt to blow up the Parliament building, but they are unsuccessful. Okay, that is all the time we have for today. So pack it up and come back tomorrow. We'll watch a little more and we'll see how this story unfolds. Is it good so far? Yeah? It's what? He's very smart? Yes, he is. Okay. Bye, people.